overwhelmed by the many tools and choices in photo editing software? Or you know your photos need something, but you're just not quite sure what to do to get the best result? Hi, I'm Sonia from Flying Parrot Photography. I help intermediate photographers push past plateaus, find inspiration, and go from good to great. When I first started professional photography almost 2 decades ago, I used to spend hours on editing, and it got really stressful trying to deliver photos in time for my clients. So I developed a workflow to process my images quickly and easily. I discovered the right tools to use to get the fast results I needed. I still stick with using these same basic tools in the same sequence, and I edit 95% of my images in under 1 minute. In this video, I'm going to take you step by step through my Lightroom process. I only use basic tools, so you can use any editing software. There's a link in the description where you can download my free editing guide, which will tell you which tools are what in which program. At the end of the video, I'm going to share the #1 thing that ruins a good photo edit. Before we begin, I do want to mention that I recommend that you always try and get the best photo you can in the field. That said, birds move fast, and so does light, and sometimes you just don't get the opportunity to adjust your settings as quick as you like. This is where sharpening your editing skills can make a big difference. This isn't about becoming a techno whiz on Photoshop and using complicated processes. It's about learning to analyze objects and light and adjust them in a pleasing way to optimize the end result. Shooting in RAW, investing in a good quality denoise filter, and calibrating your screen are 3 simple things that I think are well worth the investment in time and a little bit of money. If you're not there yet, just set these as goals because they will make a difference to the end result. I've just done a quick edit on this little Kingfisher. I did run denoise first. It's not perfect, but I just want to show you what can be done. This took about 40 seconds minus the denoise, which takes about 1 minute. Next, I'm going to go through slowly with a step-by-step so you can see exactly what I'm doing. I've chosen photos that all have some issues, underexposed, overexposed, so that you can see how to correct them quickly and easily. Here's our Kingfisher at the start, and here we have our finished edit done in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to use the same 10 tools to edit all of our step-by-steps. I'm sure you'll be familiar with most of them. I only use 6 to edit the Kingfisher. These are all very standard editing tools. Check the link in the description if you need help identifying them in a program other than Lightroom. I haven't included masking in this list because I know not everybody has it, but masking in combination with these 10 tools is absolutely fantastic and I love it, but it's for another tutorial as it is a more complicated process and we're going to keep it simple for this one. Before you begin editing, it's a good idea to take a moment to assess your image and just decide what you want to achieve. In this case, my bird is smack bang in the middle, which is the way I usually photograph, so I'm definitely going to crop this image. It's also a little bit too dark, and we have quite a bit of noise that needs attention. Getting a quality denoise filter is a really sound investment. It's really hard to avoid shooting at higher ISOs with bird photography, and it just brings back a beautiful clarity to your images. Doing denoise later can affect your edits, so best to do it at the start. And you can see using Lightroom's AI denoise what a big difference that's made already. The next thing I like to do is to crop my image. It's probably not going to be the final crop, but it's just so that I can see the details of the bird and get in a little bit closer. My next step is to bring the shadows up brighter and trim the highlights back down so that I can then adjust the overall exposure without blowing out any of the details. This has the effect of evening out the light and gives us a nice bright image. Another little trick I use is to take the contrast down and then introduce some contrast back in via the dehaze tool, which also adds some lovely clarity and brings a little bit more vibrance to the colours. By using this technique, I often don't have to add any more vibrance or saturation. Although I quite like this as a small in frame, I'm just going to crop in a little bit tighter and just add a touch more exposure and a tiny little bit of clarity to finish off. So here's before and here's after, much brighter, and we don't have the bird smack bang in the middle, which always looks much more pleasing to the eye. Let's move on to a different photo. As you can see, it's underexposed and we've got a couple of issues. We've got a bit of a wonky horizon line there. That line is just going downhill a bit, so we want to fix that. And we've also got some distracting elements in the foreground. First thing, I'm just going to adjust this wonky horizon and straighten up a little bit, and then I'm going to crop the image so I can work around that dark spot in the corner, and roughly using the rule of thirds, I'm going to move our bird into a nice position at the back and retain that little bit of colour at the front there. That's looking good. When cropping, it's always a good idea to leave a bit of room for your bird to move. So I'm going to leave some room for our moorhen to swim here into the frame. And another little trick is to grab your sliders and take them to the extreme and then try and settle on a sweet spot that you're happy with. I just find this is a good little tip to move it up and down. I often do a little bit of jiggy one way or the other and just try and find that sweet spot. So now I'm trimming back the highlights and I'm bringing up the shadows just to give us a little bit more light. And now I'm adding some contrast, which I don't use on every shot, but it's working really well on this one with this beautiful bokeh. And another thing that adds contrast is the dehaze tool. So on this particular photo, dehaze is going to work really nicely. Look at that definition that it's bringing in for us now. So we're just about done here, and a tiny bit of clarity, but not too much. Go very gently with the clarity tool. It can look really fake, but that's pretty much it. It's a long way from perfect, but I don't mind leaving a few flaws to add interest and depth. And on to our next edit. Our little Jackie Winter here is a little bit overexposed in the chest area here. We've lost a bit of detail, and we've also got this big ugly branch that we'd like to crop out. The same process again, bringing our highlights down and our shadows up, but this time we'll reduce the exposure, and look how it's brought back the detail in the breast area. If you hit the J key while in Lightroom, that brings up clipping, which shows you areas that there's no data for. Red is the brightest parts of the image and blue is the darkest parts. Your photo can still be under or overexposed with nothing showing on clipping, but it's a good indication of where you've lost data and you need to do a little bit of correction. I just want to show you what happens if we just take this overexposed image and just adjust the exposure only. What ends up happening is our background ends up way too dark. Whereas if we adjust the highlights and shadows, bringing the highlights down and bringing the shadows up, and then just adjusting the exposure as much as we need, we end up with overall a much brighter and nicer looking image. And now just my usual couple of tweaks, a little bit of dehaze, a tiny little bit of clarity, crop it a little bit tighter, and there we go. And here's our before image, and here's our buff rump thornbill after. Another really useful edit is removing twigs or little distractions out of your photo. I don't find Lightroom does a particularly good job with this, and I use Affinity Photo. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in a tutorial on that one. It's really straightforward. A common problem with forest birds is they are in dark and shady spots, and I often find myself sacrificing a little bit of exposure to get my shutter speed up higher. And white balance is also an issue here with our little pardalote looking very cool and green. I'll start with my usual process, highlights down, shadows up, adjusting just enough exposure, and then maybe a little edit to the cropping. And now let's have a look at the white balance. Adjusting white balance is one of those things that can make such a big difference. Move your white balance sliders in very small increments, as it's really easy to overdo it. Here's our cool and rather dim starting point and our much more vibrant and warm finished image. Cropping is a really powerful tool to work around unwanted objects and to provide a nice balance. Experiment with different sizes to see what suits your photo the best. Another little trick I use is to have the branch coming out of the corner of the photo almost like a leading line. Another tip is to leave space in front of the bird's gaze. It just doesn't look right if you've got your bird looking at the hard edge of the frame. Not all issues are able to be corrected with basic post-processing. Sometimes you need to go a little bit further, such as this area here where we've got this bright white spot. It's got a strange kind of halo around it. There's really not much I can do with that without using masking, which is where I can edit the bird and the background separately, but I can crop it out. Keep an eye out for objects that compete with your subject for attention and either try and minimize them or remove them altogether. Our next photo of this avocet is dull and it's also a bit far away, but we have another issue here, and that is that there's a line cutting the photo effectively in half where the land and the water meet. Unless there's reflections or symmetry of some kind, I try and avoid that line through the middle. As usual, I start by cropping and repositioning the bird and the background to roughly rule of thirds, and then following my usual process, highlights down, shadows up, and I'm also adding a fair bit of dehaze to this image as it is a little bit flat and lifeless. Don't feel you have to crop in too tight to your subject, even if you're posting on social media. It is nice to have some breathing space around the outside. Editing birds with white feathers can present a couple of additional challenges. Pay attention to exposure so that you don't lose the detail in the feathers. The second challenge is white balance. We can see our cockatoo here has a bit of a bluish tinge as I've taken this photo in the shade. If there's a lot of foliage nearby, you could also have a green tinge. Either problem is easily corrected with an adjustment to the white balance, taking care not to go too much the other way and end up with either a yellow or purple tinge. And you guessed it, it's my regular process: highlights down, shadows up, a little tweak to exposure, a little tweak to clarity, maybe a touch of the black and white sliders, and we're just about done. Now, I'm not saying this is a perfect editing system, but I think it's a great starting point for you to further develop your own workflow and process. So, what's the number one thing that ruins a good edit? It's over editing. The best edit is the one you can't see. So keep that in mind, go gentle with your sliders, and have fun. Experiment and find your own style. What are you doing?